Hello everyone, and welcome to the most cultured podcast about video games in general and game development in particular. With me, I have Rune. How are you doing?
Good. I am good.
Let's start this episode of House of Games. Most welcome, everyone. All right. How is everything?
I lied in the intro. I'm not good. I'm actually. I think I'm recovering from Corona again. If you can get that twice in 2 weeks, I'm not sure. And I cut down on snacks yesterday, the day before yesterday, and I'm having this weird feeling. And I think it's some sort of sugar withdrawal stuff because I ate shitloads of sugar and stuff for the past week and a half. So I cut down on that, and I usually get like a headache and kind of feel like a cold. So that's where I'm at right now. But I'm going to push through a couple of more days, and then I think that sort of sugar withdrawal symptoms will go away. And then I hope I can get back to the workout routine and the diet routine I had before my wife's brother's family came here. So other than that, I'm fine. And how are you?
Very good. Well rested after eating lots of candy and celebrating Christmas and New Year. So I'm fit for fight for 2023. It's gonna be a great year, I think.
Oh yeah. I actually walked home from the gym today and I came up with a theory. Are you interested in hearing it?
Yes, please do tell.
Alright, so I was born 88 and would say that my generation is one of the last ones to grow up without internet and on-demand culture. Could it be that the internet and the on-demand culture have raised a generation of privileged on-demand Nancy-Pansy people that is lacking that fighting spirit that is required to learn difficult things, such as programming, playing a guitar, and so on? What I mean is, it's hard as fuck to learn programming. But if you grow up with that sort of on-demand culture, where you get anything you want just by looking at it, you will never expose yourself to the grind, as I will call it. It's air quotes here. You will never expose yourself to the grind. Imagine the grind being this physical object, and people before the internet had to grind themselves through it and come out on the other side a little bit more grinded or tougher. So, if my theory is true, that could prove why we don't have enough talents in the industry right now. And if this theory is true, I think we will lack talents for as long as it takes for our tools to be improved to the point where even a privileged on-demand Nancy-Pansy person can use the tools without losing interest, since he or she have never been through this grind I mentioned before. I've heard that like less people are learning how to play guitars nowadays as before, and that theory, or where I read that, said that it's most likely because it's just like it's too hard. People want results and they want them now. So my theory is, I would say that the industry, our industry, the gaming industry, will lack talents for as long as it takes for our tools to be efficient enough for anyone to use them. And that's, just compared to when I was a kid and now, I just dreamt about making games, but I'm some sort of inbred northern Swede with ADHD and dyslexia. I could never imagine making games, and here I am. So just imagine how easy the tools have become. But I feel like because the tools are so easy and so easy to get your hands on, and the population on Earth is expanding, and or I guess it reached a peak-ish, but the gaming industry is growing and more people have access to all these things. It doesn't make sense that there are so much talents missing. So what do you think about that theory?
That also ties into one thing that I am interested in talking about tools. That you say that until the tools become good enough for everyone to use, there will be sort of a gap between the people with skills enough to create games, for example, and the demand for video games. And something that I've heard a lot about, and probably a lot of people have in the recent couple of days or months, is AI and its ability to generate content from what seemingly nothing, and to be able to create things that previously would take maybe hours, but now it goes just in an instant. So for example, I saw on Reddit that there's this new tool called ChatGPT, which is sort of you can imagine it as a chatbot. So you could just type to it anything you want, anything from conversation to, as I saw on Reddit the other day, a person wrote to this chatbot and said, could you generate a Unity script that creates procedurally generated dungeon levels? Within a second, it generated a script that worked for that person to generate a script that did basically what he asked for. And then you can also ask like follow-up questions. You could just say, or maybe could you add this to the script, or could you change this aspect? So in essence, it's a little bit like you could program by typing or thinking what you want to have. So the question then becomes is, will this replace a lot of programmers because they won't be needed anymore, or it's the same process as Googling except it goes just a lot faster, but programmers will still be needed? So segueing from that to what you spoke about, Rune, what do you think? Do you think it's a sort of a threat to programmers or game developers in general, or just another tool to enhance the industry?
Well, I am against this. No surprise there, because I seem to come across as the sort of less progressive one on this podcast. But now that you said all that, I mean, I am looking into procedurally generated stuff in my next game. I'm sort of against that concept in general because I think it sort of lacks that artist touch. But I do think stuff like that feel a function. That's just, from a game designer's point of view. But now talking about this script that can make that. So even though I don't really like procedurally generated stuff, I still want something like that in my next game. It's not the major part of the game. Anyway, I am looking into those things, and I found tutorials, YouTube tutorials on how to make them. And I bookmarked it, and my intention is to follow that tutorial to see how I can make a procedurally generated cave, if you will. But now that you told me that story, I'm quite interested to check it out. I can't imagine it works as well as you made it sound like, or this guy on Reddit did. I can't imagine that I just copy paste a script, slap it into my project, and it works. I feel like there still have to be a little bit of a human touch there to interact, to make the script interact with your game. And I think as a self-taught programmer, that's the hardest part about programming in general. Like, I think it's easy, you can just follow a tutorial and do whatever. For example, today I did you can change clothes and stuff in the game. But I have no fucking clue how those clothes will be saved and then slapped on to the character. I can make it work in a menu where I have a character, my pixel art character, and the clothes, I can swap them, and there's a randomize button so you can do all these kind of things. It looks really cool, and I'm sort of baffled that I pull it off even though I followed a tutorial. But the crux is still the fact that I can't actually make that work in the game, because when you start the game, the clothes are not on the player you play as. It's just, it doesn't get saved anywhere, or yeah. And that's the part I have to figure out how to actually do myself. And I can't imagine that this AI would be able to do that. But that being said, or maybe it could, because I do think in general AI is scary and I don't like it, and I think it will put us out of work, most of us. But not at this stage. But I guess I fall into the category of people who fear the AI in the future. And I don't believe in the argument that we will have robots doing everything and we humans will spend our time being artists. I think that's absolute bullshit. I think very few people will. Most people just hook themselves up to some sort of matrix and die slow and painfully in there. But I feel like I derailed a little bit from your question. If they are a threat, yeah, I do think they are. But as history have shown over and over again, every time we do think there is a threat, we come up with new ideas. But I do think that this time around will be different, because I feel like even if we come up with new ideas, the AIs can easily learn those things as well and put us out of work. So yeah, but to go back to my theory when we started, this is literally the tool I'm waiting for, like when everyone can make games who really want to make games, and there's no difficult threshold to get over. If you can just type into a fucking computer and it does it for you, that's literally the tool we're waiting for. But I do also fear it. How do you feel about it?
I don't know. It depends a little bit on what it's able to do. Or maybe that's naive to say. Maybe it will be able to, you could just type anything, or you could just hook it up to your brain someday, and then it will just generate an idea for you. And then there will be no, like, people won't even buy video games because you could just hook up your own brain and, you know, enjoy that or something. I don't know. But as it stands now, I think the hype is maybe... Like, I think the hype is more... It's overstated, I would say. Because as I've tried out the ChatGPT and tried to generate code, for example, it can actually do that. So, for example, I wrote to it and asked it to create a email signature generator in HTML, just to try it out if we could do that. And voila, in like a second or two, it could just generate all of the code. And I tried it out and it worked perfectly.
But how do you try it out?
So what you do is, and I should mention that this segment is not sponsored by OpenAI, who has created ChatGPT, but you go to chat.openai. Oh my god. chat.openai.com. And then you register there. I think it's just with your Google account or Facebook account or something like that. In the middle, you have a chat box, and you just type anything you want, and it will generate very intelligent response. So, for example, you could say, generate a Unity script to generate 10 boxes randomly somewhere. Something like that. And then it will generate... To the best of its ability, it will generate the code that you are asking for. And it is very impressive to see what it can do. But I think maybe this is my naive way of thinking about it, but to me it feels a little bit like, because us humans, we have limited intelligence, and our thinking is based on evolution from like 1 million years ago, and surviving as cavemen up until the last couple of 100 years. We've only been hunter-gatherers, and that's what we've been evolved for, and recognizing alive things and so on. So what I'm thinking when I'm seeing this, and people are saying that the chatbot is sort of feels like alive and it can do anything, it feels to me like when you see those videos of when they put a full body mirror in the middle of the jungle or something, and then they film like a jaguar or some wild animal that gets a look at the mirror and freaks out because they think it's another, they see themselves but think it's another animal, and then they think it's a threat and they growl and they jump, and maybe 1 or 2 animals in the video realize that it's a mirror image and it's not another being. And that's how it feels a little bit to me with this thing, because when you try it out, I think you can do a lot of things and it can generate code and stuff, but it doesn't do everything perfectly on the first try, first of all. So I did try to do another thing where it just converted like formatting from like one app to another, so you could copy paste, and then smileys and formatting and stuff would work, and then it generated what looked like a converter between those two formattings, but it didn't do the actual job, and it was sort of buggy because it inputted text when it converted text to added a lot of stuff that I don't know where that came from and so on. So it's not perfect, and so it feels like to me that even if this would be able to create a lot of stuff automatically, it feels to me like a a search engine just on steroids. So it just takes results that it's gotten from the internet and then just compiles it and explains it in a natural language that you could understand and gives you examples and so on. But I don't think, and anyone can just correct me if I'm factually wrong on this, but I don't think that the bot can generate anything new. It can only sample things that it's read or heard from someone else and just compile that into a result, but it can't create new ideas that are completely new that humans can. So I think if this would be widely used, then you would see a lot of similarities with how art and stuff are created. So if somebody then just comes in and does things manually, then that would be sort of a game changer, I guess.
It's kind of like just really quick, you can sort of tell that everyone who used the Unreal 5 engine, all these new game that will start coming out this year, at least I feel like I can sort of tell that they are all using the Unreal 5 engine. And not to say that they're all using the same assets, but what you're saying, it would be sort of like that. Imagine you and I both use Unreal 5, and then we just use whatever assets are available. So then eventually, when enough people do that, people can tell that we're using the same engine and the same assets. It's just like we replace them a little bit. So as soon as someone come in and make their own assets, that game would then be totally unique, even though maybe using the same Unreal 5 engine or unit or well, Unreal 5 in particular, because that's at least what I'm starting to feel like, that you can start to tell that which games are made in it and not, even though they have unique assets. But anyway, continue. It was just like a little bit of a comparison there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also, as we talked about, that noticing similarities is something that we humans are very good at. And I think it's going to be really hard for like an AI to do something that feels like new and fresh. Because to me, at least, I think that machines will not ever be able to create new ideas or be able to just fantasize the way that we humans can. So eventually you will like build up, even though you could improve these AIs. There's a great opportunity, I would say, for humans to just do things manually and then be able to stick out from the crowd. Because I saw also the other day that ChatGPT has been out for about, I think, a month or two at this point. And I saw yesterday that somebody had already created a tool that could detect if an essay or a piece of text was generated with this tool. And therefore you could just, as a teacher, for example, you could just detect if an essay that your student has written was just automatically generated and not written manually.
Oh.
So if this is such a big threat, then I don't think it would be that fast for somebody to be able to create sort of an anti-AI detector. So I think there's a lot of let's see, we'll see in 10 years if I'm wrong, but I think there's not that much that we have to be worried about. I think that there's could be stuff to gain from it, that as a game developer, at least at a hobby level, you do get stuck sometimes with bugs, or you can't understand how to read some documentation and then apply that to what you want to do. So having a bot or a search engine that could just explain a concept to you so that you understand it quickly and then can just continue instead of being stuck is a lot better for the world and would just enable more creativity and less just being stuck and getting nowhere. Is one way to look at it.
Yeah, I do writing some notes while you're talking, because I still have a couple of anti-AI arguments based on what you just said. So one would be, I remember a long time ago, this must be 8 years ago maybe, or something like that. Let's say 5 years ago, that AI could sort of predict a score for a movie based on the script for the movie. And you sort of touched on it, that the AI can't really do his own stuff. He can just create stuff based on the things that already exist. And that makes sense in that as well, then, that the AI can sort of predict the score based on just reading the script, because it knows, it recognizes cliffhangers or the red thread, I think they call it when they write movie scripts. It can recognize those things and sort of recognize what critics will think about the movie, thus give it a quite accurate score. So that's that. No point with that really, but that is sort of leading into the other thing, because I did read also quite recently, like 2 weeks ago, something like that, that this new AI stuff can, it can make art, we know that, but it will soon be able to create like an episode from Friends with your plot of choice. So you can sort of tell it that instead of Ross marrying Rachel, Ross falls in love with Joey or something like that. And then it can, as far as I can tell from reading, I can't even remember if I read the whole article. Maybe I just read the, the thumbnail. But let's say that this is what's gonna happen, then that's quite scary. However, I think it still falls into what you just said about that it doesn't really create its own stuff. It just uses things that exist. And I can't tell if it's actually going to make the movie play out or if it's just like a script or something that you will like. But I do think one thing that I fear in the future, and some of my favorite scientists, Michio Kaku is one of them, he don't seem to be scared of AI at all. But one thing that I thought about while developing games is, for example, when you make an enemy, and this enemy can jump, it can run, it can dash. This other enemy, he cannot do those things, he can only fly. You can simply copy-paste the script from one enemy to the other, and now all of a sudden both of them can do all those things. They can jump, dash, run, and fly. And what I fear is that when more and more people learn to, or feeding stuff to this AI, it will have so many things it can do that it's just, we have no match at all, like sort of. And then combined with this sort of quantum computer stuff, I do fear that they will take over. And also when we look at robots, for example, we will say, well, the robots can't even walk yet. But no, not yet. But you have one robot whose job is to sort of, I saw this YouTube film, it was just like tons of apples on a band, like on a treadmill-ish, and then it's just like these fingers, and the robot, it's not like it doesn't look humanoid or anything like that. It's just like these sticks that kicks out the bad apples. So you can see these, and the apples are coming at you in like 100 kilometers per hour. It's super fast, and it just managed to pick up all the bad apples and only let the good ones through. So that's one robot. And then you have a robot, for example, the McDonald's robot that can make burger. And then you have a robot that can weld a car together and all that stuff. But imagine then when we do have this robot that looks like a human and can move like a human, then we can just copy paste all those scripts into his head, and all of a sudden he can do all of those things. That's one of the things that I fear. I'm not, I'm a noob programmer, but I fear that that's going to happen in the future with AI, that it's just going to be from all directions at once, and then it can do all the things at once. But the only thing that when you talked that sort of made me feel a bit safer was that the human factor, that they can't come up with their own stuff yet. And I don't know if they will ever be able to do that, but let's hope not. Because I have been thinking a lot about this sort of AI stuff for the past 2-3 weeks, especially since this sort of art AI stuff started happening. And I was thinking when I heard that thing where they can sort of write a plot for a Friends episode or whatever, I was thinking, man, that means the AI will be able to write plots for games as well. Just like I mentioned before, they can write for movies, but those plots will be quite predictable. Sadly, that's what people want. I mean, look at Hollywood. When was the last time you saw a movie that really blew your mind away? I feel like they're all the same. You just watch the trailer, you know exactly what's going to happen. I rarely feel surprised when I watch a Hollywood movie, but they make a lot of money and people want that. So that's the one thing I fear, that even though the AI won't be able to replace us anytime soon in terms of storytelling and unique art design, for example, I still think that humans are so fucking simple, myself included, that we don't mind, because we seem to value convenience over everything else. And I was just playing Fortnite with my wife's brother's kids, and the game looked like absolute shit, but they absolutely loved it. And even I, who are like quite critical to Fortnite and all that, I thought, you know what, this is quite enjoyable actually. So clearly I don't seem to care either about the stuff that I think I want in my games. Not the games I'm making, but the games I'm playing. There was a lot there.
Another thing I thought about, to go back a little bit to what you spoke about, the attention span of young people today. Back when we grew up, you would hear complaints about, in my days, we didn't have color TV, and nowadays we complain that they didn't have the internet, for example. But something that's really interesting that I heard about, something else about video production. The medium changes a bit how it's perceived and how it's produced and so on. So what they spoke about was, for example, that videos that get a lot of traction, it's usually not a good, like a really well produced video with good lighting and like widescreen and the best like 4K. It's rather videos that are in vertical because of phones, and then you have it's usually, if the quality is shitty, then the views goes up usually, because if it's a video where like the YouTuber himself says like, hey, I've built this car or something, here's how I did it, then that doesn't get as much views, and as if it's like sort of almost if it looks like a person filmed off the screen watching that video, and then says, instead of this YouTuber, he says, this guy invented a car or something, and then it looks like why that gets more views, in their theory at least, was that when you watch your videos, you identify with them, and instead of having like this YouTuber, you can't identify with that person because you're not the YouTuber yourself, the viewer. So instead, when you watch like something that says that this guy did something, you think, oh, I'm a guy, that could be me, and therefore you're more interested. That was their theory at least. But to segue from that, I thought about how the medium of making games or interacting with technology sort of affects us also in some way. So the way that you interact with technology nowadays, usually for young people especially, is with iPads and phones. And the way you do that is just that you have software buttons that you press or slide or move your fingers about, but there's no like tactile writing or anything like that to make the computer do what you want to do. Instead, the buttons sort of appear seamlessly where you expect them to be, and then you just use them. But then if you look back at where I grew up, or even earlier, the way that you would interact with the computers is usually that you have to type a command or type something to the computer with tactile buttons that are like located on a specific place and doesn't like change depending on your needs. And then you have to type a command, you get the response, and then you have to understand that response from the computer and then continue and so on. And that way, the sort of medium affects also the way that we think about computing and maybe our attention span and so on. So that's just something that I thought about that's sort of related, I guess. Kind of interesting.
When you mentioned we want to watch someone else watch a movie, I was hoping where you were going with that story was that people who make YouTube videos where they made something themselves would get more traction because it would be like, I don't know, sort of lean into people being creative or something, and that gets more traction. But sadly, you didn't go there. You instead went, we like to watch some other charlatan and watch someone else make something so we don't feel like shit because we can't make it. But that would then go sort of back to what I said. We are quite simple, and that's what I worry about AI. I'm not quite sure if AI needs to make its own things, because I think that maybe Uh, Fuck, I don't know. But I do think that even though AI takes a lot of our jobs and stuff like that, I still think there will be this sort of flash in the pan moments for developers that really come out and do something completely out of the left field that an AI could never have thought of. But like I said, then I mean, we see that happening now as well. And then what happens is that all other companies or whatever, they copy that one and try to make something else similar or just tweak it a little bit. So maybe the AI will do that as well as soon as someone come out with something new. But as long as it's a human who come up with it first, I guess I'm happy with that. But then all the other games, I fear, will be made by AIs. There will always be humans involved in some way, but no, I don't know. Here's another thing that is not really AI related, but something I thought about, and it would be interesting to see. Actually, we could make it AI related, but I believe Half-Life is regarded as one of the best pasted game ever, Half-Life 1 or 2. So I thought when I started making games, how cool would it be to just completely copy paste the pacing of Half-Life. Let's say it was Half-Life 1. Let's just say you make your own game and you completely copy paste the pace of the game, you know, the highs, the lows, when it's slow, when it's action and all that stuff. Imagine you did that to your first person shooter game. You released it and then you look at what critics thinks about it. So it would be interesting to see if they thought, wow, this game has such great pacing, or if they would just think it was garbage, even though the same critics praised, for example, Half-Life for being paced so well. That would be an interesting thing to do, but obviously an AI could then do that. They could just paste copy the pasting from Half-Life and then copy whatever people love about, let's say, The Last of Us, and then, you know, sort of combine these things and make a wonderful game for us to enjoy. But I wonder also if it done that too many times, I guess it goes back to what we talked about before, that then we start recognizing it and maybe it's not as fun anymore.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually what I was gonna reply. So I think that is a lot what we spoken a bit about. So I think it could be that AIs could be able to replicate Half-Life, except make it about unicorns or something. But then I would think if you would do the same pacing and the same like number of characters and so on, I think it would absolutely become predictable in that case. So, and then you would, for example, if you would have like the same pacing in all games, then you would probably go like, oh, here comes the boss, and now comes the like silent period, and now comes the puzzle, and so on. And then if you would have just another game that's completely different and handmade, or you know, I think there's could be a opportunity in that.
I would almost argue that that's what we see with a lot of PlayStation first-party titles, like the Last of Us, what do you call Ragnarök, God of War, and so on. They're almost becoming quite samey, all of them, and I feel like others have criticized Sony for first-party titles for becoming a bit samey, and I think that if we look at the Elden Ring, which has just become this huge thing, then let's say that the PlayStation first party studio people are the AI and they just make the sort of samey stuff but in different environments, and then in this case From Software will be like the human who swoops in and makes something completely different, and that will be like the BAM thing. Can't remember where I was going with that, but
related to what we're speaking about, I would think that because it's gonna be easier to release a game, I think there's gonna be more value or more credit to those who just, if you could potentially have a AI generate a new game every 15 seconds and release it, then I think that people wouldn't play them as much because there's no thought into it, even though it might be fun once or twice. I think people would just get sick of it. So one example I have, going back a little bit about the video production. So one example I think that is sort of how I would like to do it someday is Vsauce is a YouTube channel, and they have 18.3 million subscribers. But the way that Michael Stevens, I think is called, the guy behind the channel, the way he releases videos is twice per year. So it's not once a week, not once per month, but twice a year he releases a video. And they usually get, like if I look at the last, so that's gonna be the last couple of years then, looking at maybe 10 videos. So the number of views he has is like 11 million, 8 million, 7.7, 14, 11. That's a lot of views for somebody who does like the exact opposite of what people usually recommends doing, which is releasing all the time, like every day or every week or a set schedule. And he is very infrequent, but because the content he does is it's like a labor of love. They're really full of quality and really quite different from everything else that's out there. So therefore you want to watch what he has to say. And I think the same thing will be for video games. If you have, I think I've heard somewhere that right now there's like 1,000 games a day that are released on Steam. And then in the future there will be 100,000 games that are released every day on Steam. Like the number of people is not, as far as I know, it's not gonna be that exponentially increasing. Not even if everyone in the world would start playing video games. So there's still just gonna be a set number of games that gain real popularity. And I think those are gonna be not necessarily the ones that just produce the most or the fastest, but rather the ones that, do other things. Maybe that you have a development blog, or you talk about your game, or you show like the process of doing it manually, or try to stick out some other way than just doing it with AI. It's so hard to tell though, but because it's gonna be in the future, so like nobody can tell.
I do think that when we start getting AI made games, they will sell very well and become very popular in the beginning. But I think I mentioned in some previous episodes, like the Street Fighter on Nintendo Switch, it's sold like crazy, even though everyone had played it and everyone had bought it in every damn console prior to the Nintendo Switch. But the Nintendo Switch was new, it felt fresh, you wanted to play something on it, and you went out and bought it, even though you had played Street Fighter a million times before. So I, who have been dabbling a lot in crypto, you see that every day in the crypto world, like a new coin coming out or a new NFT or something, and the prices goes crazy and then they die off really fast. And I do think that a similar thing will probably happen with the AI made games. They will be super popular first, not necessarily because they're good, but most likely because people want to check them out and it's interesting and fascinating to play a game made by an AI. And I do think a lot of companies will take advantage of that, but hopefully they will sort of die out after a while or become these sort of I don't know. Maybe we can compare it to, let's take PlayStation as an example. When they make their first party AAA games, we know they're going to be really good, even though I personally feel like they become a bit samey, but nonetheless I buy them and I really enjoy them. And then in between, you sort of play these AAA third-party games that are made by Ubisoft or EA and so on. So maybe the AI thing will be the same thing. It's like in between these real human-made games, we will play these AI games just to fill out the time. And then when a human-made games comes out, they will be very good or unique, because at that point the AI have just sort of overdone it with everything else.
I think you're probably right. Like in the beginning, AI made games will probably be able to sell quite a bit, just because the thought that they're new and they're like made in a new way. I think they're absolutely gonna sell in the beginning, but then long term, it's not clear how it's gonna develop. So on the one hand, I do agree with you that it would be worrying if like all of the manual labor on Earth would just disappear because a robot can do everything. Because I do enjoy doing stuff manually and thinking for yourself and all that. You don't want to live in the Wall-E world where everyone is just hooked up to the Matrix in a like electric wheelchair, and that's your entire life. But on the other hand, I think like there is sort of potential, because in the past you had, for example, as an example, before the Industrial Revolution, you had like something like 90 something percent of the population was responsible for creating food, and then after, in the modern era, it's maybe 1 or 2% of the people who are responsible for creating food for everyone. And that has been largely a good development. So it's so hard for me to tell, like, what will this become? It could be one thing where it's just, you know, people will be living maybe purposeless lives, or like there won't be any human-made games or some like dystopia where it's gonna be not fun at all. On the other hand, it could be that we're just like many other times when people protested about new things, that it's so hard like to see what like all of human society will aspire to in the future. And you know, maybe it's gonna be some great balanced where more people can create stuff, or maybe you can, as an indie developer, do stuff where maybe if you're really good at programming, you could just outsource an AI for like music or graphics or something else, and then you will just create more good stuff, and there's gonna be, in 5 years, there's gonna be this magnum opus new Half-Life game that both of us say that, oh, thank God we have the AI to create this, otherwise we would never experience this great game. I'm not sure. It's really, really hard to tell.
It could also be, I mean, when we think about humans making games, often we chase the money. If we had AI making games, we could ask it to make games that do not chase the money. So that could be an interesting spin to it. Like, then it will make maybe some really weird shit instead of making these super predictable things.
Yeah.
And if this AI thing we're talking about was cheap enough, then, you know, anyone could maybe ask the AI to make a game that is not chasing money, it's chasing something else, the meaning of life or your feelings or something, and then all of a sudden we're playing games that we would never think of otherwise. Even though I feel like indie developers fill that role a little bit, at least, even though we also of course need to make money somehow, but you usually see those kind of weird experiences in the indie world.
Exactly. Another thing I've also thought about when using ChatGPT is something that I'm actually worried about concerning AI. So, assuming the scenario that it's gonna be a really good tool that we can use to create new things, and it won't just have these disastrous consequences of laying people off, or, you know, all of the bad stuff. So, assuming it's good, then one bad thing that will happen is that we will have a reliance for AI to be able to do stuff. In the same way that you would have, for example, now we have, for good or bad, we have a reliance on a lot of machines and infrastructure to live life. So if the electricity grid in your city would die overnight for a month, for example, in the middle of winter, then a lot of people would be having a difficult time surviving, whereas in the past they wouldn't, because they were prepared for not having a lot of conveniences. And yesterday, when I used ChatGPT, I actually used it for a while, and then it went down for, I guess, either some maintenance or a bug or something. But then I sort of already missed it, because there was just this one question that I wanted to ask from it. So that's also a risk. So say, for example, that you are using with your company an AI to create a lot of stuff for your game. Then for some reason, either from ransomware, that somebody just shuts down the machine where you can't start it up, or maybe sabotage, or you have an electric outage, or you have no internet connection or something, and then you're just stuck. Whereas in the past, which is now, you're able to just continue working even though you have no internet. You could just keep on doing stuff. So that's also something that I'm sort of worried about, that we're reliant on a lot of stuff and we're not able to be as self-reliant as, we get less and less self-reliant in one way, sort of going a little bit closer to the Wall-E scenario with the electric wheelchairs.
Absolutely. I had a Wall-E experience the other day when I tried to call Sweden, and I ran too much about how I think Sweden have taken things too far with apps and all that stuff. But what you just talked about, it sort of reminded me of what I mentioned last episode or a couple of episodes ago. I said something about we don't know how the pyramids. Actually, when we had a guest on from FineArc, I think I talked about what if tools get so convenient that we simply forget, oh yeah, that's who, because he had learned programming the hard way, like the real hard way.
Yeah.
And then I asked him how he felt about me just coming in this late in the game and making games where a lot of things are sort of spelled out for you. But then what you just talked about, that could also be a scenario where we completely forget how to program stuff. And then that reminds me of this Netflix documentary that I'm watching now called Ancient Apocalypse. And that's sort of this guy going around the world to these old pyramids that no one talks about. Or, yeah, it's really fascinating. And that just proves, like, we didn't even know they were there, like how we forget things in history all the time. So that could be a scary future too, where we simply forget how to program because we just ask AI to do it for us. Because I guess you could make a brand new, very unique game even with the help of AI, as long as you're a human. Yeah, I guess that would be still different from an AI making the whole game by himself. But as long as we have human input, we can make things interesting. But if we start using these tools too much, then maybe we forget completely. Or maybe, I think it's quite likely, we'll forget how we program stuff to begin with. And if we have robots doing things for us, maybe we'll forget how to do things like in the real physical world as well. But you sort of talked about this before, like in the future, we can't tell the future if it's good or bad. And you mentioned that every time a new thing comes along, you have people like me who's quite skeptic and don't think we should go there. But then it turns out that it was fine. Things turn out all right. I do think that even though I think this time is going to be a bit different, it's still sort of, it probably would be all right, even though someone like me don't think it's good. Kids who grow up with these things, they don't know what they're missing out on. I keep reminding myself this all the time, like now that I play with these kids all for a whole week, like they're playing on their fucking smartphone. Come on, man. Like, why would you want to do that? You want to use like a real controller? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
But no, they have no problem doing it. And I think like, oh god, I can't believe what the shit they're missing out on is crazy. And I'm always thinking about my own son, like, how am I gonna raise him? I don't want him to, do all these bullshit, sit and watch Netflix or YouTube all the time. I want him to experience the real world, like what I consider being the real world. But maybe he's, even let's say we move to Tokyo where he can't experience those things that I did as a kid, driving around on a 4-wheel drive, or I was like 10 when I drove a car for the first time. Like all these things you can do in this Swedish outback.
Yeah.
Like I want to give him that. But maybe he don't give a fuck about it. And even if he don't get it, let's say we live in Tokyo, he's not going to experience any of that. He will be probably fine. He won't care. Because you don't know what you're missing out on. So why would you care? It's sort of like me. I'm allergic to a lot of stuff. I don't know. When people eat a Mars bar, they say it's amazing. But I never tried because it will kill me. But I don't know what I'm missing out on, and I'm fine. I can eat something else. And the same thing with these kids growing up now, or, the next generations to come, where they live in societies where robots do everything for them. Maybe they will just do something else, or maybe they will be perfectly fine living in that sort of Wall-E world where you're hooked up to a fucking chair and just swoop around and get fat. Maybe they will think it's perfectly fine, and that's, what they consider a great life, and so on. So, I guess in the end of the day, all my concerns are pointless.
Well, I wouldn't say pointless. I mean, regardless of what the future will be, I still think it's a really good thing that we think about it and discuss it. And if it's gonna be a doomsday scenario or utopia, I think still it's good to at least be able to think about it instead of just letting the world just happen, and then before you know it, you've missed out on being part of history. I think it's gonna be really interesting to see going forward what it's gonna be like. I've seen that there's been, I think, one game that's almost entirely AI generated, where you have like the voice actor and the art and a lot of the stuff that's been created by AI.
Interesting to have voice actors too. That's something I really want in my upcoming game, but I know how expensive it is, so that would be something to look into. And I have one I guess we're about to wrap up soon, but I have one cocky remark to make before we stop, because I've been thinking about AI in the gaming industry, as I said, quite a bit. And as I'm writing my next game, sometimes I feel like like this is why AI will never beat us humans. Some of the twists I made, I am so damn proud of, or like I really think it's gonna throw people off, that I'm feeling like, yeah, AI can go and fuck itself. It can't take us. So, but we will see when the game is out. Maybe no one cares about it. So,
very good. I really look forward to it. Yeah, I think that's really wraps it up then, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like that was a thought-provoking episode. It's always fun to talk about AI. I love the topic, but I think I love it so much because I fear it.
It's that mystery, I guess, that draws you in. Morbid curiosity, in a way. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. And I can just let you know that we have sort of a milestone for listeners on the podcast, actually.
Ooh.
So right now we're up to the staggering number of 50 listeners over our 3 episodes that's been released. So big applause. It's going forward, and people seem to be... Actually, what sort of surprises me is that I thought that people would just listen to only the latest one, but people seem to be going back to the first one the most. And keep listening to that. Or maybe it's new people who start off with the first one, I guess.
Okay.
Really exciting that we get some listeners and some numbers. It's fun to see that you have a little bit of impact, I guess, from what we do.
Yes, that's awesome. Yes.
So thank you so much for joining me again, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Hi, bye.
Bye.